Welcome to Around the World in 30 Minutes, where we break down the most interesting stories in finance and economics globally in, well, you guessed it, under 30 minutes. I'm your host Tarun, and today we'll talk about a new miracle drug that promises to cure one of the world's deadliest diseases. And then we talk about something confusing happening with the world's largest economy. And then finally, an update on how AI is stealing your job. Let's first dive into a topic that's been making waves in both the medical and financial world: the new class of weight loss drugs that's reshaping waistlines and wallets. Let's start with the basics. What are these new weight loss drugs and how do they work? The stars of the show are drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. These medications belong to a class called GLP-1 receptor agonists. They work by mimicking a hormone in our body called GLP-1, which is naturally released after we eat. This hormone does a few key things. It signals to our brain that we are full, reducing appetite. It slows down the emptying of our stomach, making us feel fuller for longer. And it stimulates the release of insulin, helping to regulate blood sugar. But here's where it gets interesting. The inspiration for these drugs came from an unlikely source: the Gila monster. Yes, you heard that right. A venomous lizard native to the southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico. Scientists discovered that the Gila monster's venom contains a hormone similar to human GLP-1, but it lasts much longer in the body. This discovery led to the development of the first GLP-1 receptor agonist, exenatide, which paved the way for the more potent drugs we are seeing today. These drugs were initially developed to treat type 2 diabetes, but researchers quickly noticed that patients were losing significant amounts of weight. This led to their approval for weight loss in individuals with obesity or overweight with at least one weight-related health condition. Now, you might be wondering, why all the fuss about weight loss drugs? Well, it's because obesity has become a global pandemic. Nearly half of Americans are projected to be obese by 2030, and worldwide, there are now more people who are overweight than undernourished. This isn't just a cosmetic issue. Obesity is linked to a host of health problems, including heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. It's also incredibly costly, both in terms of healthcare expenses and lost productivity. But these drugs aren't just changing bodies, they're changing behaviors in ways we never expected. For instance, the publishing industry has seen a significant drop in sales of diet and weight loss books. It seems people are turning to prescriptions rather than paperbacks for weight loss advice. Even more surprisingly, patients are reporting unexpected effects beyond just appetite suppression. Some individuals taking these drugs for weight loss have found that their impulse to shop excessively has disappeared. Others have walked out of stores realizing that their carts contained only the items they came to buy, something they'd never experienced before. There are also reports of reduced interest in alcohol, smoking, and even compulsive behaviors like nail biting and skin picking. These anecdotes aren't just coincidental, they are backed by science. Researchers have been testing GLP-1 drugs in lab animals to curb the use of alcohol, cocaine, nicotine, and opioids with promising results. The potential benefits don't stop at addiction. A major trial showed that semaglutide reduced the risk of major cardiac events, including stroke, heart attack, and death in certain patients. This led the FDA to approve Wegovy for reducing cardiovascular risks in some individuals. The drug has also shown clear benefits for conditions like sleep apnea, kidney disease, and liver disease. There is even an ongoing research into its potential for treating fertility issues, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and colorectal cancer. A phase 3 trial is currently underway to test semaglutide's effect on early stages of Alzheimer's, with results expected before the end of 2025. While it's too early to call these drugs a panacea, their wide-ranging effects are certainly capturing the attention of medical researchers across multiple fields. Of course, no drug is without its downsides. Common side effects include nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, although these often subside over time. There are also concerns about the long-term effects of these drugs, as they are relatively new to the market. Now let's talk about the economic impact. These drugs are reshaping more than just waistlines. They're having a significant effect on various industries. The economic ripple effects are indeed far-reaching. And here's what we are seeing based on the latest reports. First, healthcare costs. While these drugs are expensive, they could potentially reduce the societal costs of obesity. In countries like Germany and the Netherlands, the annual costs of drugs like Ozempic are actually lower than the additional healthcare costs associated with obesity. In the publishing industry, we are seeing a significant impact on diet book sales. Since June 2021, when Wegovy was first approved, sale of health and fitness books in America have fallen by 15%. In the weight loss industry, companies like WW, formerly Weight Watchers, have seen their market value fall by more than 90% since June 2021, as investors worry about growth prospects in light of these new drugs. In the pharmaceutical industry, the market for these drugs is booming. Some analysts predict the obesity drug market could reach 100 billion annually by 2030. For workplace productivity, there's potential for increased productivity and decreased absenteeism if these drugs improve overall health, as obesity is linked to more frequent and longer sick leaves. In the US, Medicare doesn't currently cover obesity drugs, considering weight loss a cosmetic rather than a medical issue. In the food and beverage industry, while not explicitly mentioned in our sources, there are implications for restaurants and food manufacturers as people consuming these drugs eat less. The ripple effects of these drugs extend even further. The transportation industry is taking note. Airlines and car manufacturers may soon need to reassess their seat sizes and weight limits. As the average body shape changes, so too might the design of everything from airplane seats to car interiors. This showcases just how far reaching the impact of these drugs could be on our daily lives and infrastructure. But the innovation doesn't stop with the current drugs on the market. Pharmaceutical companies are already working on the next generation of treatments. These new drugs aim to target multiple hormones simultaneously, potentially offering even greater weight loss effects. For instance, tirzepatide, marketed as Mounjaro, already targets an additional hormone on top of GLP-1, and a drug that targets three hormones is on its way. This multi-pronged approach could lead to more effective treatments, but it also adds complexity to understanding their full impact on the body. Another exciting development is the push towards oral versions of these drugs. Currently, most GLP-1 drugs are administered via injection, which can be a barrier for some patients. Novo Nordisk is working on an oral version of semaglutide that works just as well as its injectable counterpart. However, the oral version requires a much higher dose of the active ingredient, which has led to production challenges and delays. If these hurdles can be overcome, oral versions could make these treatments more accessible and convenient for millions of patients worldwide. The full economic impact is still unfolding, but it's clear these drugs have the potential to disrupt multiple sectors of the economy. Now, let's talk money. The companies behind these drugs are seeing their profits soar. Novo Nordisk, the maker of Ozempic and Wegovy, has become Europe's most valuable company with a market capitalization of over $400 billion. Eli Lilly, which produces Mounjaro, isn't far behind. The market for these drugs is enormous. Some analysts predict that the obesity drug market could reach $100 billion annually by 2030. To put that in perspective, that's about the size of the global smartphone market. But there are challenges ahead. Supply shortages have plagued these drugs, leaving many patients unable to access them. There are also concerns about the long-term costs. These drugs are expensive, often over $1,000 per month, and many insurance plans don't cover them for weight loss. Now, as we wrap up the story, it's clear that these weight loss drugs are more than just a medical breakthrough. They are a cultural and economic phenomenon. They're changing how we think about obesity, addiction, and even the nature of appetite itself. But they also raise important questions. How will our healthcare systems adapt to potentially millions of people needing lifelong medication for weight management? What are the long-term effects of manipulating our body's appetite signals? And how will society change if obesity becomes a treatable condition rather than a lifestyle issue? These are questions we'll be grappling with for years to come. But one thing's for sure, the story of these weight loss drugs is far from over. It's a story that touches on health, economics, and even our understanding of human behavior. And it's a story we'll be following closely here on Around the World in 30 minutes. Now let's talk about the confusion in the Chinese economy. When it comes to China, it's tempting to think in simple binaries. Is the economy booming or busting? Is China an unstoppable juggernaut or a paper tiger? But the reality, as always, is far more nuanced. Let's explore the paradoxes that define China's current economic situation. We're going to unpack a tale of two Chinas that's leaving economists and policymakers scratching their heads. On one hand, we have a China grappling with serious economic challenges. On the other, we see a China that's rapidly becoming a global leader in cutting edge technologies. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory narratives? That's what we'll be exploring today. First, let's look at China's economic struggles. Consumer confidence has plummeted to levels not seen since the data began being collected. The real estate sector, which has been a cornerstone of China's growth for decades, is in the middle of a slow motion collapse. Youth unemployment got so bad, reaching nearly 20% earlier this year, that Beijing temporarily stopped publishing the data. This isn't just a cyclical downturn, it's a crisis of confidence in the Chinese economic model. But here's where it gets interesting. At the same time, we are seeing another China emerge, one that's leapfrogging the West in key technologies. Take electric vehicles. Chinese brands like BYD are now the world's top EV exporters, surpassing Tesla. They're not just competing on price, but on quality and innovation too. In solar panels, China's dominance is even more stark. They control over 80% of every stage of the solar supply chain. In advanced battery technology, it's a similar story. So, how do we square these two conflicting narratives? To understand, we need to dive into China's economic model and explore a concept called a balance sheet recession, developed by economist Richard Koo. Koo first observed this phenomenon in Japan during the 1990s, and now many economists, including Stephen Roach, see parallels in China today. A balance sheet recession occurs when a major asset bubble bursts, leaving many companies and households with more debt than assets. In other words, their balance sheets are underwater. In a normal economy, when interest rates fall, people and businesses borrow and spend more. But in a balance sheet recession, they do the exact opposite. Even with rock bottom interest rates, they focus on paying down debt rather than spending or investing. Their priority becomes repairing their balance sheets, not maximizing profits. This is precisely what we're seeing in China right now. The bursting of the real estate bubble has left many Chinese households and companies in negative equity. As a result, they're cutting back on spending and investment even as the government tries to stimulate the economy. The tricky thing about balance sheet recessions is that they can create a vicious cycle. As people and companies pull back, overall demand in the economy falls. This leads to deflation, which makes debts even harder to pay off, further depressing spending and investment. Koo argues that in this situation, conventional monetary policy becomes largely ineffective. You can't solve the problem by lowering interest rates because the issue isn't the cost of borrowing. It's that no one wants to borrow at all. This is why, despite China's central bank cutting rates, we're not seeing a significant pickup in economic activity. Chinese government bonds yields have fallen to remarkably low levels, around 2.1% for 10-year bonds. For a developing country like China, this is extraordinarily low and signals a lack of private sector borrowing. Now let's explore a crucial historical parallel that both Stephen Roach and Richard Koo have highlighted: the similarities between China's current economic challenges and Japan's experience in the 1990s. Japan, like China today, was once seen as an unstoppable economic juggernaut. It had mastered high-tech manufacturing, and many predicted it would soon overtake the US as the world's largest economy. Sound familiar? But then Japan's asset bubble burst in the early 1990s, plunging the country into what Koo termed a balance sheet recession. Property and stock market values collapsed, leaving many companies and households underwater on their debts. This is strikingly similar to what we are seeing in China now, particularly in the real estate sector. Just as Japanese companies and households focused on paying down debt rather than spending or investing, many Chinese entities are now doing the same. Roach points out several other parallels. First, demographic challenges. Japan's working age population peaked in 1995, while China's peaked in 2015. Both countries are grappling with rapidly aging societies. Second, productivity slowdown. Japan saw a significant decline in total factor productivity growth, much like China is experiencing now. Third, zombie companies. In Japan, banks continue to lend unprofitable zombie companies to avoid realizing losses. There are concerns that China is facing a similar issue, particularly with state owned enterprises. 4. Policy responses. Japanese policymakers, like their Chinese counterparts today, were initially reluctant to acknowledge the severity of the problem and hesitated to implement deep structural reforms. However, there are also important differences. China's per capita GDP is still much lower than Japan's was in 1990s, suggesting more room for catch-up growth. China also has more policy levers at its disposal, given its unique economic model. Ku's research on Japan's experience led him to advocate for aggressive fiscal policy to counteract a balance sheet recession. He argues that when the private sector is deleveraging en masse, the government must step in as the borrower and spender of last resort to keep the economy afloat. China has indeed been using fiscal stimulus, but much of it has been directed towards industrial policy and building productive capacity rather than boosting household incomes and consumption. This is where China's approach diverges from Ku's recommendations. Now let's put some hard numbers to China's export boom, which is at the heart of what some are calling the second China shock. China's trade surplus has reached staggering levels in recent years, showing a significant acceleration from previous decades. Let's break down the numbers to get a clearer picture. For the period 2010 to 2020, China's average annual trade surplus was $250 billion. This decade saw considerable fluctuations but overall maintained a substantial surplus. However, the period from 2020 to 2024 marks a dramatic shift. The average annual trade surplus for these 5 years jumped to $480 billion, nearly double the average of the previous decade. When we look at these surpluses as a percentage of GDP, we see an interesting trend. During the 2010 to 2020 period, the trade surplus averaged about 2.5% of the GDP. For the 2020 to 2024 period, this increased to an average of about 3% of the GDP. While these percentages are high, they're not as dramatic as the peak of China's export boom. In 2007, for instance, the trade surplus reached 8% of the GDP. This suggests that while China's trade surplus has grown enormously in absolute terms, the country's overall economy has also expanded significantly. Nevertheless, the sheer size of this surplus and its rapid growth in recent years are causing concern among China's trading partners and contributing to global trade tensions. The consistency of these high surpluses suggests this is not a temporary spike but potentially a new normal for China's trade balance. This trend raises important questions about global economic imbalances, the sustainability of China's export-driven model, and the potential for increased trade frictions with major partners like the United States and the European Union. China's approach to subsidizing industries is both massive in scale and unique in scope. According to some estimates, Chinese industrial subsidies are 3 to 9 times higher than those in advanced economies. A conservative estimate puts the figure at around $220 billion annually, or about 1.7% of China's GDP. Unlike in the West, where subsidies often take the form of direct payments or tax breaks, China's system is more complex. It includes preferential lending from state-owned banks, below market land prices, and energy subsidies. Local governments play a crucial role, competing to attract industries deemed strategic by Beijing. This system creates what some economists call Hunger Games scenario, where multiple companies in the same sector receive support, leading to fierce competition and often overproduction. While this can result in rapid scaling and innovation, it also frequently leads to overcapacity and financial stress for less successful firms. China's consumption share of GDP stands in stark contrast to other major economies. In 2022, household consumption accounted for about 38% of China's GDP. Compare this to 68% in the United States and around 50 to 60% in most developed economies. This low figure reflects China's investment-heavy, exported-oriented growth model. It's a key reason why economists like Stephen Roach argue that China needs to rebalance its economy. Roth suggests that for sustainable growth, China needs to boost consumption to around 60% of GDP, a massive shift that would require transferring wealth from the corporate and government sectors to households. The challenge is immense. Despite years of rhetoric about rebalancing, China's consumption share has remained stubbornly low. This is partly due to high household saving rates, driven by inadequate social safety nets and limited access to credit. It's also a result of an economic model that has consistently prioritized investments and exports over domestic consumption. While economists like Koo and Roach paint a somewhat gloomy picture of China's economic future, it's important to consider alternative viewpoints. One such perspective comes from Vincent Gave, co-founder of Gavakal Research. Gave argues that many Western observers are missing a crucial point about China's economy: its rapid technological advancement. He suggests that rather than facing a Japan-style stagnation, China is actually leapfrogging the West in many key industries. For instance, Gave points to the Chinese electric vehicle market. He notes that BYD, a Chinese automaker, recently unveiled a hybrid sedan that can travel 2,000 kilometers on a single tank of gas, a feat that outpaces anything produced by Western manufacturers. Gave also highlights China's progress in areas like high-speed rail, digital payments, and renewable energy. He argues that these advancements are creating new sources of productivity growth that could help China avoid the fate of Japan. Moreover, Gave contends that China's export boom isn't just about overcapacity or weak domestic demand. Instead, he sees it as a sign of China's growing competitiveness in high value industries. The fact that China is now exporting sophisticated products like electric vehicles and advanced manufacturing equipment rather than just low cost consumer goods suggests a fundamental shift in its economic capabilities. This perspective challenges the notion that China's current model is unstable. While Gave acknowledges the real estate sector's problem, he believes China's technological prowess and industrial policy could provide new engines of growth. Of course, Gave's optimistic view isn't without its critiques. Some argue that he underestimates the structural challenges China faces, particularly in terms of demographics and debt. Others point out that technological advancements alone may not be enough to overcome the deep-seated imbalances in China's economy. Nevertheless, Gave's perspective serves as an important reminder that China's economic future isn't set in stone. The country's ability to innovate and adapt shouldn't be underestimated, even as it grapples with significant challenges. It's crucial to address the elephant in the room: the growing geopolitical tensions between China and the West, particularly the United States. Stephen Roach emphasizes that this rivalry has reached a critical point with far reaching implications. He argues that the antagonism between these superpowers risks derailing not just economic growth, but also global efforts to combat climate change. Historian Adam Tooze echoes this concern, pointing out that China's dominance in green technologies like solar panels and batteries makes it an indispensable partner in the fight against climate change. Both Roach and Tooze warn that the current trajectory of US-China relations, marked by increasing trade restrictions and technological decoupling, could significantly slow down the global green transition. Tooze goes as far as to say that in a world facing unmistakable signs of climate change, there is no such thing as excess capacity in non-carbon green energy products. The West's resistance to Chinese green tech, driven by geopolitical concerns, might prove to be a critical mistake in the long run. This puts policymakers in a different position. How to balance legitimate national security concerns with the urgent need for rapid deployment of green technologies? So, we're left with a China that's pushing hard to become a global leader in key technologies, even as its traditional growth engines sputter. It's a strategy that's creating both opportunities and risks, not just for China, but for the entire global economy. The Japan comparison offers both cautionary tales and potential lessons for China. Will China be able to learn from Japan's experience and chart a different course? Or will it fall into a same pattern of prolonged economic stagnation? Or perhaps, as Gave suggests, will China's technological prowess allow it to forge a completely new path? These questions have enormous implications, not just for China, but the global economy. Unlike Japan in the 1990s, China today is deeply integrated into global supply chains and is the world's largest trading nation. Its economic fate will have far reaching consequences for countries and companies around the world. Navigating this complex reality will be one of the defining challenges for policymakers and business leaders in the coming years. The decisions made will shape not just the global economy, but potentially the future of our planet. Now, let's talk about how AI is creeping into our personal and professional lives. AI tools like ChatGPT are taking the world by storm. Or at least they are if you go by the narrative. Not a day goes by without some new model or update that promises to change humanity. Then there are consultants like Bain and McKinsey that are predicting that the market for AI products and services could reach trillions of dollars. These generative AI systems promise to revolutionize how we work, writing emails, analyzing data, even coding software with just a few prompts. Whether the hype is real or not is a matter of opinion, and reasonable people could argue for days and still not come to a conclusion. But one of the ways to figure out whether the hype is real or not is to look at the adoption rate of these generative AI tools. That is to look at how many people are actually using AI on the job and what impact is it really having. Well, we finally have some hard data to answer those questions. Some US researchers just released the first nationally representative survey on AI use in the US, and the results are pretty eye opening. Let's start with the headline numbers. As of August 2024, nearly 40% of American adults have used generative AI in some capacity. At work specifically, 28% of employable people are using AI tools on the job. And get this, about 1 in 9 workers say they're using AI every single day. Interestingly, AI use is actually more common outside of work than on the job. About 33% of adults report using AI in their personal lives, though they tend to use it less intensively than at work. So, who exactly is adopting AI fastest? The study found some clear patterns. Men are more likely to use AI at work than women, 32% versus 23%. Younger workers under 40 have much higher adoption rates than those over 50. And perhaps unsurprisingly, workers with college degrees are about twice as likely to use AI compared to those without degrees. Among college grads, those with STEM majors are leading the pack in AI adoption. When we look at job types, AI use is the highest in tech and management roles, with about half of the workers in those fields using AI. But interestingly, AI adoption is pretty widespread across industries. Even in traditionally blue-collar fields, over 20% of workers report using AI tools. The finance, insurance, and real estate sector is leading the charge with a whopping 51% adoption rate. Now, what are people actually using AI for on the job? The most common tasks are writing, administrative work, and interpreting or summarizing information. But AI is being applied to all kinds of work, from coding to customer service to data analysis. When it comes to specific AI tools, ChatGPT is the clear frontrunner, used by 28.5% of AI users. Google's Gemini is in second place at 16.3%. One of the most intriguing findings is around productivity. By combining data on AI usage with other studies on AI's impact, the researchers estimate that the current AI adoption could be boosting overall labor productivity by somewhere between 0.1% to 0.9%. Now, that might not sound huge, but remember, we're still in the very early stages of this technology. The study estimates that between 0.5% and 3.5% of all work hours in US are currently assisted by AI. And speaking of early stages, one of the most striking things about this study is just how quickly AI is being adopted. The researchers compared AI's growth to previous transformative technologies like personal computers and the internet. And they found that AI is being adopted significantly faster than either of those. Just 2 years after ChatGPT's release, AI already has higher usage rates than PCs did 3 years after the first IBM personal computer hit the market. And it's on par with the internet adoption rates in the late 90s. Interestingly, there's a gender flip compared to the early PC adoption. While men are more likely to use AI today, women actually had higher adoption rates for PCs in the early days. The researchers suggest this might be due to the high proportion of women in administrative roles when PCs were first introduced. So, what does all of this mean for the future of work? Well, it's clear that AI is rapidly becoming a mainstream tool across industries. And while current productivity gains are modest, they could accelerate quickly as technology improves and becomes more widely used. It's worth noting that about 27% of workers say their employer actively encourages AI use. As more companies get on board, we could see adoption rates climb even faster. At the same time, the uneven adoption patterns raise some important questions about who will benefit most from AI. Will it widen the gap between college educated and non college workers? Or between younger and older employees? These are issues policymakers and business leaders will need to grapple with. One thing's for certain, AI in the workplace is here to stay, and its impact is only going to grow from here. We'll be keeping a close eye on how this trend develops. By the way, we're running a quick poll and we'd love to hear from you. We wanted to figure out if AI has already creeped into your life. It'll only take a few seconds to answer. Check out the link in the description for the survey link. By the way, this is the first of many episodes of Around the World in 30 minutes to come. So if you have any feedback or anything at all for us to improve this episode, please let us know in the comments below and we'll be happy to hear them.